Good morning, everyone. All right, I'm going to try that one more time. Good morning, everyone. All right, thank you. So I am very excited to turn this over to my colleague, Ken, in one moment. But before doing so, what I wanted to do is just take a moment to connect the themes. See, we have an overall narrative story that drives our content when we come together for these cross-site convenings. And so for the purposes of connecting themes, what I wanted to do is remind us of the conversation that we opened with yesterday. And I want to really double down on Rashad's note that this is absolutely, without question, a racial equity and gender justice initiative. At the same time, it's very important to say that in the teaching spirit of Josh yesterday, we are also deeply committed to supporting all of our communities to build local coalitions that help you collectively harness and move power to drive this opportunity youth agenda. And those two ways of thinking about this strategy are key to how we are supporting change locally in communities across our network. So that was our opening plenary. After that, we went into our lunch plenary and we heard from Desmond and we heard from Ellie. And the themes that feel really key to lift up is how we continue to build on this question of building a more inclusive, a more equitable, and a more just democracy, coupled with thinking about the priority populations we care so deeply about. What does it mean to do this work on behalf of justice-involved youth? What does it mean to do this work on behalf of undocumented youth? And then maybe most critically, this notion that all of these issues are intersected and connected. So as we think about our work, taking that holistic frame is key to how we also drive this agenda. At the same time, in beginning our plenary this morning, the work on the ground is about pathways, getting to better, more effective pathways for the young people we care about. That's why we're going to have this conversation now about post-secondary outcomes, and we're going to lift up these themes of equity and justice because we know that we have to meaningfully integrate equity into our post-secondary agenda so that our young people can achieve the outcomes we are supporting them to attain. And then we're going to close by looking at this broader movement because we recognize that together we all rise or together we all fail. So because we're so deeply committed to that broader movement frame, we're going to invite our friends from our global communities to come up and share more about their global work. And once again, we're going to intersect these themes around career pathways, around youth voice, youth-led change, and youth engagement. So I wanted to make sure that we took some time this morning to connect this so that you have that bigger picture narrative of how all of these pieces come together to tell a whole story of a movement that is deeply committed to moving an opportunity youth agenda. So without further ado, now I invite Ken to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Thompson. I'm a senior fellow here with the Forum for Community Solutions. We're here to talk about post-secondary education this morning. I'm using the term post-secondary intentionally rather than college because when we're talking about post-secondary, I just want to make clear we're not talking just about four-year colleges and degrees or even two-year community college degrees. We mean that for sure, but we also mean shorter-term educational certificates and also things like registered apprenticeships. So as we use the term, or if we end up sort of substituting the word college for post-secondary throughout this conversation, just really know that we mean all of those things in most cases, if we say the word college. So there's been a surprising recent amount of public attention on college right now, right? Free college and debt-free college have come up in the Democratic presidential debates. Free speech topics and affirmative action lawsuits are in the Supreme Court related to higher education. Celebrities are buying their kids' way into college. And there are perennial questions, right, about the worth and value of college, and maybe even conversations about the disruption or the death of post-secondary itself. So these are all pretty important topics, right? And really, some of them might even speak to our main topic today, which is really about equity in post-secondary education and systems. But also, behind the scenes, if you will, there are less sexy but just as important things going on. So within colleges and universities, there are things like guided pathways and developmental education reform, the emergence of more food pantries to support students and decrease hunger, and higher ed's in more and more partnerships with local community-based organizations. These CBOs are providing navigation and other kinds of support services to reduce barriers, particularly for opportunity youth and the kind of low-income and first-generation students we're frequently working with. So we're going to hear about many of these proven and very promising efforts from presenters here today. But I really wanted to first, just like Monique, also ground this session in our convening themes of equity and justice. In a real way, post-secondary institutions and the post-secondary system are built and based on exclusion and intentional inequality, excluding unqualified people from both college and then from the jobs that require post-secondary credentials that you can't get without those degrees. I am reminded of Rashad's remarks yesterday. He said, some people are artificially at the top and some people are artificially at the bottom. And this system of post-secondary is really a part of making that kind of thing happen. It's a kind of sorting hat, if you will, right? Some people get to go and some people don't, as if we really live in a meritocracy, and we're all pretty probably clear that that's not the case at this point. It'll take real work to undo the history of inequity and injustice, but the reason we're here today and having this conversation and why we're focusing a plenary on post-secondary is that changes and successes are happening in post-secondary systems and in community organizations to support students. Working post-secondary options for opportunity youth are not only a social justice issue, but they're clearly an economic justice issue as well, right? Having a post-secondary credential increases your lifetime earnings by at least $500,000. So to get to the place where post-secondary really does work for our opportunity youth in all our communities, we're thinking that three conditions are necessary, and importantly, they need to come together in place in order for young people to succeed. One is that college, including the living expenses one needs while in college, must be affordable to everybody. Cost can't be the barrier to accessing and completing college. Second, post-secondary institutions themselves have to be welcoming and restructured so that opportunity youth and other students can succeed inside of these institutions. These institutions can't be engineered so that they only support one type of student. Local community organizations must be respected partners in higher ed, and they must be both supported and funded to be effective partners where they can play the proven supporting role to opportunity youth and other disconnected students. So the good news is that all three of these things really are happening around the country in many places, and many of you are working on these in your community. And while there's more work to do to adequately fund these things and coordinate the activities in place, the last 5 years in particular, I would say, have seen a lot of rapid change in post-secondary options and improvement in post-secondary institutions. Among those making some of these changes, even I would say rethinking what it means to be a post-secondary institution, is Southern New Hampshire University. Our keynote today, before we're joined by a range of other leaders in post-secondary equity issues, is from Dr. Adrian Hagebrook. He's Senior Vice President at Southern New Hampshire University, and he's the COO at something called LRNG, which he will explain to you. His 3-year career in both higher ed and community-based organizations has been committed to influencing access, equity, and opportunity from the local to the global level, and for those who have been invisible, marginalized, and underserved, and he frequently writes and speaks on these topics. If you were to ask him about his purpose in life, he said he would say, to serve and to be of service to others. That really sounds like one of our people to me. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Adrian Hagebrook. Thank you.
So, good morning. So just a couple of things to note based on Ken's introduction, and I appreciate that, Ken, is that I've been in this business more than 3 years. It's actually been it's like 3 decades. So there's that. 3-0, yep. And then the other piece of this is, again, I appreciate that because this is an opportunity for all of us to engage in some very real, purposeful work. The notes that he just shared about me in terms of the introduction will probably carry with you, but the thing that will probably carry with you the most is you're looking and you're saying, there are black people in New Hampshire? Yes, there are. And when I got on the plane to come the other day, the population decreased by a certain percentage point, but it's okay. But the thing that guides me and guides my colleagues and many of us in our work is mission and people. And so when I think about the work and think about where I am, it is mission and people. And obviously being in New Hampshire, I also have to contend with some other things. So I kind of, use quite a bit of scotch to get through the day, or not really. But this is really an opportunity for us to engage. And actually, I want to apologize to you from the very beginning. You see the title on this screen, which is Rethinking Higher Education. And I apologize because it actually probably should say Reinvention of Higher Education and Postsecondary. And here's why. Can you imagine a world where anyone, regardless of their background, and you can envision any of the opportunity youth, anyone that you're working with, anyone who's marginalized in our communities, in our society, those who are disrupted or their families and lives are disrupted by systems that are inequitable. Could you imagine a world where anyone has that opportunity to thrive? Now, you might look at this and think that this is a vision statement for, like, Disney. What if this were a mission statement for post-secondary? And here's the reason why.
My name is Freddie Sipake and I am 17 years old. I feel like skateboarding has definitely impacted my life. Whenever I'm having problems, it's my escape. I like architecture for many different reasons. Every building has its own uniqueness. You can just put mind to it and create something beautiful. What I'm most concerned about is how my views are going to change. So I know I like architecture and skateboarding right now, but I don't know if in a few years my whole mindset is gonna change.
My name is Juliet McLaurin. I'm 18. I guess I can say I became how I am now just because of where I grew up and how the community has influenced my life. I don't love going to school, but I love learning. I need to know the purpose behind why I'm doing something, and that's kind of what pushes me to want to learn, knowing that there's something that I'm going to be gaining from it. I don't want to just do it just to do it. My parents didn't go to college. When I was at home asking for I need your tax papers, I need this for college, they were ill-informed on what to do. I feel like I would say I'm my own mentor. I always tell myself I want a life where I don't have to worry about money. I want to be able to do what I want, but be financially stable.
My name is Crystal Aguilera. I'm 17. My parents, they're divorced. That was a little hard on me. There was a time where I just didn't want to do anything, and it kind of affected my school. It wasn't until high school that I started to shape up. It was a little hard to express myself because I was constantly between two households. I would come to my mom's house and then I would go to my dad's house. It'd be way different. That was just kind of an external thing, like an environment thing. I would much rather be doing something I love than something I need to do just to get by.
My name is Simone Segar. I'm 18. I guess my passion would be to create things. I draw a lot, and I started a small company where I draw portraits for people, so I love doing that. I don't want to be stuck at a boring office job. I want to be doing something or making a difference.
My name is Kyrie Mosley and I'm 18 years old. Every now and then, there'll be a shooting or just some gang-related activities. Don't wear my hood, don't wear certain colors. I've always been into drawing. I always got in trouble for it in class for drawing on my test or my notebook. The art aspect and the business aspect of running a brand, it's not just all creativity and just making what you want, but there's also a business side with it. Nothing really prepared me to be an entrepreneur. Really, it just was the people around me. One of my favorite designers, I met him, asking them questions and picking their brains, and them saying I'm next up really empowered me.
There's a lot of people in my life who just don't look happy with the job they have or the career that they have. And I just don't want to end up like that. Life is so short and I don't want to waste it. I don't want to be stagnant, so I just always want to be moving on to bigger and greater things.
Success to me would be being happy with what you have. I don't want my career just to be a job. I want my career to be part of my lifestyle, to be something that I do every day because I want to do it.
I want a job where I'm always learning. I feel like people think you go to school and then you stop learning and that's it. But I want to learn for the rest of my life. So something where I'm just constantly learning something new or traveling somewhere. I don't know what job that would be, but that's the ideal.
To definitely give them the resources that they need, because I really feel like we are the future. And if you set up the future correctly, you can make this world really better than it is now.
So, listening to those voices, listening to the premise and the tenets that Ken started off this conversation with, my argument and my apologies that this should be retitled Reinventing Higher Education. Through those voices, there are things that you're hearing. You're hearing that there is a love of learning. But what is the connection between learning and passion? You see, there's this perception, or maybe it's the reality, that often higher education is seen as this bubble in between work and career and learning and education. And then if we think of it in sort of a stepwise process, it's K-12, higher ed, and then work and career. The reinvention of higher education, the reinvention of post-secondary, the reinvention of learning should not think of it as a stepwise process, but should envision it as an ecosystem of learning. And so what are some of the reasons and what are some of the things that are failing in higher education, or at least perception, or maybe even reality? Cost. We all hear about the escalating cost of higher education. Did you know that the price of a public four-year in 1978, if you translate that into today's price, you could send 12 students to college based on 1978 prices compared to now, to one. A student, the average cost for a four-year public institution over 4 years is almost $85,000. A private, even higher. An 8-year-old today, by the time she or he or they hit a post-secondary experience, that four-year public cost now escalates to almost $150,000 over the 4-year period. So we have a cost issue. Debt. College debt has reached insurmountable levels, $1.4 trillion. On average, that's about $33,000 per student. The return on investment. There's a lot of conversation now about, is college or is the post-secondary experience really worth it? The data still proves that it is, but that margin of difference is beginning to shrink. So the difference between what a high school degree would have gotten you compared to what a college degree would have earned you was a little over $1 million more in lifetime earnings. But the net gain has really shriveled down to about 14 to 16%. Yes, it's still a return on investment, but I'd like to think of about, in terms of equity and justice, where's the return on opportunity? When you think of outmoded delivery, There's a lot that people say about online education and that, well, it works for some, it doesn't work for others. But if you look at the recent data, you're beginning to see this robust gain in online, quality online education. Why? Flexibility. Why? Pace. Why? Because it fits the need and the dynamics of those who are wanting to move into the learning in that post-secondary setting. And then completion rates. We all know that, over the last several years, there's been a lot of focus on how students enter and how they complete in a post-secondary setting. And if you begin to disaggregate that data and start looking at it based on race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic, the more of those qualifiers you pull out, the deeper and lower those numbers become. And particularly when you look at our Native American students and learners, only 1% of those are actually moving into our post-secondary. We have got issues, and higher education and post-secondary has not been kind in that regard. And then there are a whole host of other factors. The higher ed market is beginning to shrink. I serve on our regional accrediting, higher education accrediting council, and literally just finished an evaluation visit last week. In the last 6 years, because I do one each year, in the last 6 years of institutions that I've visited, 3 of those colleges have closed their doors. And you're going to begin to see that consolidation happening at a much more rapid and rampant pace. Public confidence around higher education is drowning. The most recent data shows that roughly 48% of the American public has confidence in our higher ed system. That is down since 2015. And oh, by the way, the only thing that's above us and below us, above us, police at 54%, right below us, religion and organized religion and denominations. The things that we're above, Congress, the presidency, and the criminal justice reform. Not sure if we're running in this right team. But this is really about reinvention. This is really about innovation in higher education and post-secondary. And so because I represent Southern New Hampshire University and LRNG, which is an organization that we merged with a year ago this month, in fact, we are thinking and designing and doing very differently. And so if you go back to that mission statement at the very beginning, that vision statement about imagine a world, that's what's leading and guiding this work. We don't see ourselves as a post-secondary institution, although we are, and we have to per accreditation purposes. But we really see the work that we're doing is rewriting justice issues. We see it about equity and equality. We see the work that we're doing as really framing learning, connecting passion, connecting interest, connecting these very deliberate and intentional pathways. What we think about this series of engaged learning experiences that lead to real opportunities. And so you heard me mention before that we're really framing this work around ecosystems. And when we merged with LRNG, which LRNG is an organization that provides a multi-sided digital platform where Opportunity Youth and others can go onto the platform and earn badges. And these badges unlock opportunities. And these badges and these playlists actually begin with the student's interest, a learner's interest. And in fact, at SNHU, we don't even use the word student anymore. We call them learners because they can come in and out of our ecosystem at any point in time. So imagine Adrian as a 15-year-old in Chicago, and I'm connected with an organization or a partner organization in Chicago who's focusing on those who have interest in music. That's my interest. That's my draw. That organization is partnered with LRNG SNHU. I get to play on the playlist to find out and discover more about, and each time I finish a playlist, it unlocks an opportunity for me. So now my music and interest unlocks an opportunity for me to go shadow someone in a music studio. And then my next playlist unlocks an opportunity for me to have an internship at a local cultural organization. And it keeps going on and on and on. But imagine an ecosystem, as you see up here, imagine an ecosystem where all of the fragmentation that exists within our systems, all that disconnection, all the reasons why our young people, our young learners are disconnected and wanting to disconnect from the things that they see. Imagine if all of those things were hyper-coordinated in a way that was really truly serving the learner at the center. So imagine the Chicago Public Library or your public library saying, I now better understand where and how I can support learning, growth, development in my community. Imagine you have an employer who now says, I understand what you mean by seeing their competencies and what the students are delivering. I can now acknowledge that badge, and oh, by the way, complete the badge, and you get a summer internship with us. Imagine a hyper-coordinated ecosystem where Adrian, as that 15-year-old, can move in and out and learn and grow and earn not just potential, but I have real currency in that system. And so here we sit at the middle of this intersection. We sit at the middle of this intersection where we are coordinating and collaborating and connecting between community, technology. We're thinking about education. And so much of what we talk about is our schools aren't doing this, they're not doing that. But what is post-secondary doing to unhinge the burden that we all are placing on our education system? How do we see ourselves as partners in that process, partners in learning, partners in that learner experience? And so SNHU is on a journey to do that. We see the future of higher education. We see the future of our organization doing just that. We are at 135,000 learners, both on our traditional campus, which is that New England bucolic, you walk on. It's always fall, right? When you see those magazines, it's always fall, right? So we have a traditional coming-of-age campus, and we have a large online platform. We look at this and we say, no, we don't tout our numbers because we want to be number one. We say this to help accentuate the fact that the need is so great that we need others in this formula to create the scale to have the impact that we need. 50,000 opportunity youth that are engaging in our platform and our work. And we're actually doing work in refugee camps around the world. Malawi, Kenya, Lebanon. We're just now opening up a pilot site in Haiti. These are some of the most desolate, despairing places in the world. I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the conditions. This is the work that we need to be about. And these are the outcomes that we're beginning to see. So now we're seeing 53% graduation rate. So you might look at that and you say, hey, that's slightly more than half. But if you know the numbers, you know what that graduation rates are in this country. We're talking about down in the 30s. And if you're looking at progression rates and graduation rates at community colleges or two-year colleges, we're talking about in the teens. Keeping in mind this graduation rate, we are servicing the very people that we're all serving in this room. We see that the experience is great. 94% of our learners are saying, I would absolutely recommend SNHU to someone else. And, oh, by the way, remember we talked about that economic piece? We're seeing some very positive shifts in people's economic outcomes. And, oh, by the way, what other institution do you know that is asking this question? Are you ready for it? How can we ensure that a learner, when they start with SNHU, is better off financially when they graduate from SNHU? We're not waiting for them to graduate from college. We're looking at the factors that improve their conditions while they're doing their experience. We have an opportunity agenda that is focused on equity, that is focused on justice, and is focused on improving the quality of life all the way around. And of course, we're serving thousands of students, as I said, in the refugee camps. Former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, who has done some tremendous work with us in thinking about the work and our expansion of our work, said this. Very recently, we had an engagement with him in February where he brought some of his young men from the Chicago CRED program. And if any of you know Chicago CRED, this is a program in Chicago that's really working with those who were formerly incarcerated, those who were perpetrators of crime and violence, or recipients, or all of the above. They say that the average young man who's participating in their program has been shot at least 2 times. And if you elevate that, that means that many of them have been shot multiple times. And so this is what Arnie has said. He's been doing some advising work for us in his gym, in our international work. If you can deliver education in a refugee camp in Rwanda, you can do it in the south side of Chicago. And so guess what? We did. And let me share with you something that just happened. Literally, this is yesterday. So we took up that challenge because we are trying to serve those who higher education and post-secondary is not serving. And so this was the notice that just came through our Slack channel announcement yesterday. Morning all. I'm excited to announce that our first set of young men at Chicago Cred that completed their Badges to Credit pilot in August just enrolled in SNHU's Associate's Degree in Business Administration course-based program. Each completed about 20 plus badges on the LRNG platform, and guess what? And they earned 10 college credits towards their AA. Thanks to everyone that assisted in making this happen. We're all super excited about the next set of possibilities for this program. So I share that challenge with you. It could be Chicago Cred. It could be the work that SNHU is doing now, where we're able to take the playlists and the badges that have been primarily oriented towards opportunity youth, and now we're actually able to badge those to credits so that they're real currency, and those credits can now be deployed. And oh, by the way, did I mention it didn't cost them anything? They didn't have to use any federal financial aid. Some of them couldn't qualify for federal financial aid. That's another policy thing we have to work with. But this is what's happening. This is where we need your engagement. And so I end my conversation with you in the very same way that I began it. Imagine a world. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so my name is Mamadou Njai. I am a program director at JFF, and I'd like to invite these panelists up here to join me. Please go ahead, please. Okay. Are we ready? Okay, so thank you. So thank you everybody for being here today. So as many of you know, JFF has been partners with the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions since the beginning of this movement. I am, one of those people who have been coming to Aspen since the very beginning. So I've been here probably more than 10 times already. So, and I just want to offer a reflection before we start the panel. So I am just amazed. Every time I come here, I'm amazed at just how beautiful this place is, and how serene this place is, and frankly, how rejuvenating and re-energizing it is for me. This work is hard. The work that we're doing together is really hard, but coming to Aspen makes a huge difference for me. Every time I come here, it feels like the first time. I meet people, I contribute and participate in the learning, and to me, it makes me want to go back and continue to plow ahead to do this work and on behalf of young people. Now, once in a while, your flights will get canceled. Right? But to me, it's worth it, right? So it being here, working with you, partnering with you, interacting with you, to me is worth it. So thank you for that. So I am honored to be moderating this next panel. In addition to Adrian, whom we just heard from, I'm delighted to be joined by Anna, Danica, and Keisha. I'm not going to go into detail about their bios. I think you can look it up later, and they'll be here to talk with you further about their work. So what I wanted to do instead is just starting with Anna, just to share reflections on what you just heard from Adrian, and just to, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do, and share a couple of reactions about what you just heard from Adrian.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm here representing Sacramento, California. I'm a long ways from home, but I'm here with the Opportunity Youth United movement. Shout out to the OIU family out there. Just to reflect off of what Adrian said, I'm a first-generation college student, so just hearing the work that's being done right now in our nation, it really does warm my heart, because being a first-generation college student, my parents migrated from a small island in the South Pacific called Tonga. And so you don't see a lot of Tongans in higher education at all. And so I found myself having to battle a lot of different struggles and barriers that I had to overcome in post-secondary education. I went to California State University, Chico, and there I got a lot of experience with this Pipeline Through College mentoring program. And that's what we'll go ahead and talk about later. But just that program itself, I was able to have a lot of resources that were offered to me by my institution. And having those mentors, having people who really truly believed in who you are and took the time out of their days to really mentor you and guide you towards success really transformed my life. And had it not been for the connections that we had to the CBOs in our community and the connections that we had in the communities, I would not be sitting here in front of you all today, letting you know that it is possible to create this change within our post-secondary education system, especially for our opportunity youth out there who are struggling and looking for those resources for them to be able to succeed. So shout out to Adrian and all the great work that you're doing. Hopefully we can partner up after this conference, yes. So that's who I am, and thank you for having me today.
Great. Danica?
My name is Danica Martinez. I work for Seattle Education Access as a program director. I'm originally from the Yakima Valley in Washington, which is a agricultural area, and I've been working in Seattle for about the last 11 years. Seattle Education Access is an organization that does predominantly one-on-one support for students in the Seattle-King County area who are opportunity youth. And what our model really does is work to provide a model that is one-on-one support for students from the very beginning and doing early exploration, program pathways, career exploration opportunities for students, and then doing everything from the large, big picture ideas to the small steps of filling out financial aid forms, doing admissions, doing kind of the steps that you might do with somebody who's a younger sibling or a parent or a child that you have as well. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the pieces that I was struck so much about in Dr. Adrian's speech was really thinking about the way that our program, how our program can kind of mesh with an opportunity where a higher ed institution is placing the learner or the student at the forefront, at the center of everything that you're doing. I think that our model is very student-centered in the way that we begin conversations around, what are your interests, what are your goals, what are your dreams, what are you excited about, what do you want to learn? Unfortunately, though, when we are working around systems and gaining access to higher education, there's often a balance between teaching and advocating for a student in how to learn how to navigate a system that was not meant for them, and maintaining a balance of kind of holding on to who they are. And that doesn't always feel great as somebody who's navigating systems with students, because you remember what it's like for yourself to have to let go of part of yourselves and make a lot of sacrifices, and not being able to maybe be there for your family or not show up as your true self every time you're stepping into the classroom because there's no one else who looks like you, or the subject matter is around ideas that you're not familiar with, or you're not prepared for it in a way that you thought that you were originally. And those experiences are, I think, at the front of our mind for our program staff who are navigating these things every day. So for me to imagine a system that would not require students to give up who they are in order to succeed in a system is almost unimaginable, to be honest, because of the ways that we see students really struggle with imposter syndrome, for example, and really trying to understand that they have a right to be there, even though they are sitting in classrooms and being in systems that were not made for them, that were built on white supremacy and institutionalized racism.
Cool. Yes. Thank you.
So, hi everyone, I'm Keisha Bird and I'm with CLASP, the Center for Law and Social Policy. We are a 50-year-old anti-poverty organization that really centers racial equity in our public policy work. And what that looks like is it means, do our public policies that we're advocating for, at whatever level of government, do they help or harm communities of color? So I like that Monique and you, Dr. Adrian, wove in the conversation about equity and justice. So I represent our youth policy team, and I'm really privileged to work alongside my colleagues, Dr. Rosa Garcia and Lauren Walliser, who lead our post-secondary and workforce work. And we really see those things as together. We don't have post-secondary policy here and workforce development here. We really think about them putting them together as pathways out of poverty. So they're not a panacea, but we know that they're important strategies in our toolbox in order to help lift opportunity youth, young men and women of color, to think about those impacted by the criminal justice system, and of course communities of color who have been historically harmed by racist policies, as a way and a pathway to gain some of what the so-called American dream is. So we really focus on those things. And so I'm always questioning myself, so why? Why do we focus on these things? And so when I was reacting to your remarks, and you gave us like this linear K-12 post-secondary and work, we know that's not the reality. As I mentioned, we're an anti-poverty organization, and when we look at today's student, we know that if we're thinking about those who are living in high poverty communities, coming from low income communities, more often than not, most of them are independent students. So they're not going to their parent or their guardian to fill out the FAFSA or the financial aid form. They are independent students. They are already working and navigating what it looks like to be in the LRNG program, badging program, as well as to think about what it means to take a class and so on and so forth. So we have to really consider the complexity of then how do our policies better support a Chicago cred. I was actually with the Chicago cred folks a couple of weeks ago in New York, and it's legit. Just want to let y'all know it's legit. What I was struck by those young men, we were at an event called Education is a Civil Right. And as we think about our higher education policy, the Higher Education Act, which governs most of our policies, which can implement some of these best practices that we've already talked about or not implement them, that bill was first signed in 1965. So it came from the anti-poverty and civil rights commitment of this country that is currently being dismantled. So this important conversation is really critical to opportunity youth, but to all our young people, in particular the young people who've been left out. And those are young people of color, our boys and men of color, and our young women of color who are in rural, urban, and suburban communities that need access to opportunity.
Yes, Keisha.
Thank you, Keisha. Adrian, let me turn to you. So I recently heard someone describe the U.S. post-secondary education system as a perfect mode of transmission of class and privilege. And I wanted to get your reactions on that, and also ask you, just how do you see the sort of post-secondary market changing from your vantage point?
Yeah, so just to be clear, there is no one spending $500,000 to get into SNHU. And so that is not the case. You know, for our university and we really do consider ourselves to be a system. Because as I shared in my comments earlier, the learners that we are really focusing on are those that are left on the margins, those who have not had quality opportunities and access to high quality post-secondary experience. But if we wait until they get to the post-secondary experience to get access to it, then we as an institution, as an organization, as a system, are continuing to perpetuate the system. And so we really need to think more upstream as we really begin to think about those learners where they are, regardless of where they are, and again, regardless of their backgrounds. So how do you, as Keisha was just saying, how do you capture those learners who are already experiencing everything from economic to the learning to all these other social dynamics? How do you shape and fashion an institution or an organization or a system to actually be able to capture that, to be able to create that level of access to that? There are others in higher education who are thinking this, but we also realize that it's not just getting students or learners into the door and getting them into the classroom. And in fact, I know that there's some debate that folks might want to argue with me, and if you do, we can take it outside, where you'll say, yeah, but online doesn't work for a lot of learners. But this is where the community partnerships come into play. And so when you think about providing, if SNHU is providing the content, the curriculum, and the training, and the partner organization is providing the nuance of support because they are community focused, they know the nuances of the community, they know who they need to connect with to provide that wraparound service, guess what the possibilities or the probabilities are that you will be that much more successful. So where is the role for higher education to play, or post-secondary to play, in helping, in collaborating with, in leading or following, and setting the conditions for success for learners? That's a different paradigm.
Thank you. Let me switch to both Danica and Anna. So I know, Danica in particular, that your work is a lot about personalized guidance and student supports, campus navigation. And so when you sort of work with students who are enrolled in college, what are some of the things that you see them struggle with, and how do you actually support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when thinking about the barriers that students are facing in accessing higher ed and continuing through higher ed, I think what's really important for us to think about, and that I have to remind myself on a daily basis, is that the barriers that students are facing are really manifestations of like the white supremacy and institutionalized racism culture that we have kind of built through every single system that our students are walking through on a daily basis. And so I think that from larger systems like insufficient housing, poor public transportation, food deserts, things like that, those larger systems are not separate from higher education. Those are huge barriers that do not disappear once you enter the college classroom and are maybe then considering yourself a learner. Those are things that are, I guess, continuing to be barriers throughout your life until you have a system that makes sense for you, right? Or have figured out a way to move past those systems. And so even when we think about the smaller barriers or the detailed barriers of the specific forms, for example, that students have to fill out for financial aid, those tiny pieces are also manifestations of those systems, because if you think about the hoops that students who are low income, who are first gen, who are folks of color, who are students with disabilities have to fill out, there's 37 extra steps that you have to do if you're in one of those categories, just to start day one, just to figure out how to access your online orientation, just to figure out how to access the website to find your orientation, to find your syllabus, to figure out who's your teacher, where your classroom is, how to get your books. If you're an upper middle class student, you don't have to worry about those things. You're paying for your tuition and you're showing up to learn. You also have a support network, right? If you have something go wrong with your car, you know that you can call somebody because you have this backup support system that can be there for you when you really need it. If you maybe are somebody who's an opportunity youth, that what might be considered a small thing of needing new tires or something like that, needing a new bus card, that can be the difference of continuing in your education or not that quarter. Yeah. So from the very, very small details of what it takes to get into higher education and stay there to the larger complex systems, those are huge barriers that students are facing every single day. And I think that with our one-on-one support model, we've sort of figured out the way in which we can really value relationships and have healthy relationships between our program staff, which is an education advocate, and the student themselves, to kind of have an authentic relationship that allows sharing of and creating safe space for figuring out what's really going on with the student, how to choose classes, but also understanding what it feels like to be the only student of color in your classroom. And I think that having somebody in your corner that you trust and that you can go to when you have challenges, or even that you can celebrate your triumphs with, that type of one-on-one support model has really shown to be very powerful. At the same time, our one-on-one support model can't give up unless those systems go away, right? Unless we figured out a way to make access better, or to fully think about deconstructing our systems and rebuilding them in a way that is student-centered, that does place the learner and their interests and passions at the center of everything. I think until we do that, the type of one-on-one support model that we value so much is not going away and is absolutely necessary. What I'd also like to say about that is that our model, I think that when we describe what Seattle Education Access does and some of the great results that we're having, folks might expect some sort of magic solution or formula that we have to supporting students. And really it's simple. It's providing a support system, one-on-one support, providing healthy relationships, and showing students that you love and you care for them the way that you care for somebody in your family or your friend. The reality is, though, is it takes time, it takes energy, and the recent Urban Institute evaluation that we had showed that our students with the comparison site were 3 times more likely to enroll in post-secondary. And for Black and brown men and boys of color, they were 7 times more likely to enroll in post-secondary. That's giving us really a launching point and a platform to be able to talk about this model that we think is really helpful to students and really works. But we really know that that's just the beginning, right? Gaining access to higher education is the first step. The challenges don't end there, and it's really about long-term support and retention. And I think that's where we also really need to figure out strategies of supporting students and maintaining in the system, while at the same time reimagining the systems that they're in order to support every type of learner.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to just pick up on something that you said and actually highlight something that Ken actually also said earlier, which is that this work is possible, right? We're some of the communities in this room and around the country are doing it. We're creating evidence that this is possible, that helping opportunity youth enter post-secondary and persist and complete is possible. And I want to lift up Opportunity Works, which is the Social Innovation Fund initiative that, in addition to South King County, Boston, present here, Philadelphia, Hartford, and Santa Clara County and San Francisco and New Orleans were involved in. And Opportunity Works actually, as you said, achieved these amazing results, one of which to me is just fantastic, which is that 6 times as many young men of color entered post-secondary education as compared to a comparison group, right? So this work is indeed possible, and the framework that we used in Opportunity Works is the Back on Track framework, which is guiding the work of South King County and other communities that were involved in Opportunity Works. And I wanted to turn to you, Anna, because you talk about mentoring in particular as something that made a difference for you. So I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, and also to highlight some of the challenges that you faced and some of the challenges you see other young people like yourself facing in college, and how and who's helping you, and how are you getting through.
Yes, okay. So just to go back to what Danica was talking about and echoing that everything that we do in our Pipeline Through College program is not and cannot be one and done. It has to be long-term support for our opportunity youth. Because one of the main barriers that I've also noticed within our Pipeline Through College program is the fact that a lot of our students come from disadvantaged backgrounds where on a day-to-day basis, they're just trying to worry about surviving. worrying about how can I help my parents provide for my younger siblings? How can I help provide for a roof over our heads? And so a lot of times that confidence and that low self-esteem definitely plays out in our students' lives on post-secondary education. And so helping them maneuver through that confidence and that low self-esteem really is how we operate in our nonprofit organization. Really having those one-on-one, heart-to-heart conversations with our young people is where it starts, because we've recognized that operating from a sense of love, and just like what you said, Danica, looking at your students like they're just a family member or just a child is really what got us to move them from being stuck in this mindset where it's like, I'm never gonna make it, I'm never gonna succeed, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Moving them from that mindset to, yes, I can. Yes, I can change those barriers. Yes, I can make a difference. And that's my life. As I mentioned to you all already, I'm a first-generation college student, and my life would have went so much different had I not listened to those mentors that I had in college. And through this Pipeline Through College program, I had mentors such as my cousin. So I was homeless my very first semester at Chico State. I didn't have resources coming from a Title I school, coming from an underserved area. I never had those mentors because a lot of times, like I said, my parents didn't go to college. Nobody in my family knew how to maneuver that system. And so I had to find a lot of those answers on my own. So I knew I wanted to get out of Sacramento. I knew I wanted to be able to spread my wings and fly and grow. I just didn't know the exact answers on how to get there. And so landing in college at Chico State, having a mentor such as my cousin, who I was able to stay on her couch for a whole entire semester, she was able to plug me into these opportunities on our campus, which is where I found Pipeline Through College. Had you all asked me 5 years ago to talk on a panel, I would not have had the confidence or the self-esteem to be able to stand in front of people to talk about my story and how impactful mentors can be. And each and every one of you can be a mentor. Everyone has something to share, something to give, something to teach. And our motto in Pipeline is play, connect, and teach. Once you're able to play with the students and get them to take off those cool jackets, you know, a lot of our opportunity youth have those cool jackets on. A lot of them have bodysuits. I had a bodysuit on. And so once you're able to break that barrier and connect and play with them first, that's when you're able to then connect with them, heart to heart, have those heart-to-heart conversations where you're able to address childhood trauma, where you're able to address why they're feeling depressed and they can't connect to their professors on their campus. And then from there, you're able to teach them success skills, leadership skills that we know a lot of K through 12 isn't teaching at this moment. And so through that model, play, connect, and teach, I've recognized that it's a two-way street of mentorship. In college, I went from F's and D's my first couple of years to them being on the dean's list, recognizing that my students, they looked up to me. And so I needed to hold myself accountable for everything that I was pretty much supporting them with. And so through that model, I know that we were able to change a lot within our own students' lives by connecting heart to heart with them. We say a lot how it's not about the hard work, it's about the heart work. And so when I say it's not about the hard work, I want you all to say hard work. Ready? It's not about the hard work, it's about the
Hard work.
I can't hear you. It's not about the hard work, it's about the
Hard work.
Exactly. So that's what we like to teach in our Pipeline Through College program, and that's how we operate in this nonprofit.
Thank you. Thank you. So Keisha, I wanted to turn to you. I mean, we talk about, and I think Adrian and Ken earlier touched on this as well, and this has been kind of a theme throughout this convening, inequity in the post-secondary system. I just read the other day that, you know, this is from the U.S. Department of Education, right? So in the academic year 2015-2016, that white students earned 67.5% of bachelor's degrees, 68% of master's degrees, 70% of PhDs. So these inequities are still here, right? And so I just wonder, just from your perspective, what's the role of policy in helping us address these huge systemic issues?
Okay, great. I'll try not to wonk out on y'all. So I'll start pretty high level. So I wanted to pick up on something that you were talking about, Anna, is that this is about hard work. And a lot of times when we do policy, you're like, well, you can't legislate people to love other people that they historically have left out and hated and perpetually show that through policy. So how do you how do you reconcile with that? And that's kind of our work every day, to really think about how do you bake in equity into policy, including post-secondary. So first, really thinking about what does that look like. And when you bake in equity, you not only think about targeted populations, but it's not just to say, oh, we've increased our serving, communities of color or students of color. That is not really baking in equity. It's really thinking out the particular strategies that both Danica and Anna mentioned, and how do you think about those strategies? It's thinking about resource investment, right? Ken started off talking about debt-free college and college promise. So it's thinking about the resources that are needed to make sure that not just what you need in terms of supplies and books and tuition is paid, but all your living expenses are paid. It's thinking about proximity and access. So, the community college may be 2 hours away or 1 hour away if you're not in a big city. So how do you create access through online opportunities and those kinds of things? And it's really also accountability. Who are we holding accountable for not just enrolling our learners, not just our students, our learners, but also serving them well, right? And mitigating the isolation that they face. And so that accountability goes to making sure that Dr. Adrian and his colleagues are accountable for the resources that they receive from our public dollars. And so that's what a lot of what our organization, including with Ed Trust and others, have really been thinking about. What is the accountability? And accountability also means getting rid of these for-profit institutions that gouge our communities and are predatory to opportunity youth, to folks who are returning from the criminal justice system. And we know many of our family members have been impacted by those things. So that's really what equity means, and when we think about policy and it matters. So I actually also want to share just a kind of a little story and something that is happening now at the federal level, and that is really holding hostage funding for HBCUs and historically black colleges and universities and MSIs, minority serving institutions. And a lot of times in these kind of spaces, we don't really place them at the forefront, but they're the original open access institutions, right? And so when we see this political football for those particular institutions, we know what that means is this dismantling of our civil right to higher education and post-secondary education. And so when we think about the isolation, when you mentioned Danica, and you were talking about going into places where young people feel isolated, we learned this in our work with young women of color, and they said, they didn't call themselves a woman of color until they got in white spaces. They were just among American, or I'm just Mexican, or I'm just black, but I'm a woman of color because I was in proximity to the white spaces, primarily in post-secondary education. And so we have to really think about where are we sending our young people to toxic environments and what is going to support them. So I'm a strong proponent for open access institutions, and that is community colleges, that is historically black colleges and universities, and that is minority serving institutions that are located in the community and have a historic record of serving our students well. And a lot of times policy says, well, they don't have the academic credit. What is the return on investment for workforce and so forth? But they're supported in a holistic way, that students come out feeling proud of who they are and not in these toxic environments. So just want us to also think about that, and no matter where you are in your your cities or in your communities, there are these kind of institutions near you, and they're the original open access institutions. I went to Spelman, which is a well-known HBCU, but for my first 3 years, for my first 3 years, I never had my FAFSA or anything filled out. I would just go to the financial aid office, and they said, we know what's going on. And it was fine until it went business-like. And then in my senior year, I was at threat of not graduating because it went business-like because of the threats that federal policy put on our institutions. So we have to think about the interplay of how we're supporting our institutions at the policy level and what it means to support all of the practices and programs we know that work for our young people at the same time. And it's not easy.
Right. Yeah. Right. Thank you, Tiffany. So Adrian, I want to go back to you. So in preparation for this, I had the opportunity to spend some time on SNHU's website, and congratulations, by the way. It's a great website. It's really it's it's just a different feel when you go to SNHU's website in terms of sort of a customer focus. So you have a whole range of initiatives, including Duet and Peloton, which is not the bike, the expensive bike, by the way. And so you talk about these sort of urban ecosystems in which you partner with community-based organizations. So I wanted you to describe a little bit, what that partnership looks like. How are you partnering with community-based organizations in these ecosystems? What are you doing? What are they doing? What are you all doing together?
And first response to your note about the website, again, as I shared with you before, our focus is relentlessly on the learner. So we don't care what others think about the website, it's what is that learner experience. And so that's what it's designed for. It's mobile first, it's all the ways, however you access it, it's learner first. So I appreciate the focus on that. So let me respond to this very question about how do we partner with the organizations and do it from the equity paradigm. So one might think, oh, you're a high-rate institution, it's all about enrollments, and so therefore the more enrollments you have, the higher your revenues, the better all that stuff, right? No, let's look at it from an equity perspective. So take into consideration everything that we've already said. And so imagine the Seattle Education Access Network being able to scale their work, not just serving in that locale, but actually being able to expand the work that they're doing. And then imagine a learner like Anna, who had that very experience where it was very high touch and intentional, and being able to do that through the organization in which you were a part of, and that had the opportunity to scale. But then also keeping in mind that in Anna's situation, Anna had to go to Chico. She had to go to that university. Well, what about if the content actually came into the community? And that you actually partner with organizations like the Peloton U's and the Duets in Boston to actually help facilitate that. And so those wraparound services are actually wrapped around the learner. The content delivery in the online format is the way that you get it to them. So how many of you have Netflix? How many of you have Netflix on your phone? Okay. How many of you take your phone everywhere that you go? So if you take A plus B plus C, that means that Netflix is everywhere you go, right? And where you've been. What if learning and content in a post-secondary setting was exactly the same way? And that's exactly what we're delivering on. And so now you have that opportunity through your partnering organization to facilitate content with the wraparound services and the mentorship that you need. And so what we're building is an infrastructure for scale. It doesn't mean that post-secondary has to do all, be all, and the end all. But when you take organizations who are doing the great work on the ground in community and doing it with populations that have not been served well in a post-secondary, then that's where the collaboration, partnership, and scale comes in. And, oh, by the way, from an equity perspective, the organizations that are sponsoring or supporting the students, SNHU doesn't get all the money. From an equity perspective, the organization gets half of that money. And also from an equity perspective, we don't look at what are your SAT scores, this, that, and the other. Our programming is based on competency-based education. And so you get to demonstrate what you know and what you've learned. So how about that, where you can actually bring the experiences that you've already captured. It doesn't matter if you did it in working at a grocery store or something that you learned through, you may have been a member of a gang, and you actually kept the books for the gang. If you can demonstrate the competency and you achieve that, it qualifies. And so the other piece to this is, so then equity means that access is already there. There's no threshold that you have to go through, except maybe be associated with the organization that's partnering with you and with us. And so it really is about that ecosystem. It really is about building this to a point of scale. And again, remembering what I said earlier is that we don't walk around, SNHU doesn't walk around saying, hey, we're the largest nonprofit provider in post-secondary ed. We have the most numbers. We don't compete. The thing that we compete with is the fact that there's even more need than what we can serve. And so by creating these ecosystems, and we're doing it in Chicago, in Birmingham, we're doing it in New Orleans, we're building more of these ecosystems and partnerships so that you can bring it to scale. And so that Anna's story doesn't become the exception to the rule, it's what is expected of post-secondary.
Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to touch on and bring you, Danica, and Keisha into this on developmental education. So many of you may be familiar with developmental education, and basically, when you show up at a community college, you are asked to take a test, a placement test, and you do 2/3 of all incoming students who go to community college are put in developmental education. Why? Because they don't pass or they don't score high enough to bypass developmental education. 2/3, right? And there have also been studies that show that 75% of students placed in developmental education do not complete a degree 8 years later, right? So developmental education, I think for good reasons, has been called a black hole. It's been called a Bermuda Triangle for the students that we work with. So I wanted to turn to you, Danica, and see, just in terms of preparing students academically, there's the social and emotional, which we've talked about, but it's just in terms of how do you help students be academically prepared to enter post-secondary. And before you respond, I want to note that there's been a lot of work done in this space, actually for many years, including JFF. JFF has done a lot of work in this area, Complete College for America, community college leaders around the country through Achieving the Dream, post-secondary developmental education initiative, and so on and so forth. But the issue still remains, right? So I wanted to ask you, from your perspective and the work that you do, what does help look like in that area? How do you help students overcome the developmental education barrier?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's interesting that it is often a requirement to take a test in order to place into your first college classes when you've just graduated from high school or earned your GED or whatever, so you having to prove yourself again doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The fact that those two systems kind of aren't streamlined in order for students to seamlessly transition from one to the other is just really disheartening. And I think that it also, when you're thinking about placement testing, it also goes back to how standardized testing affects low-income first-gen students of color. And so we're already, placing those students at a disadvantage again. And I think that it is important to think about, if we're showing students how to transition and navigate into these systems that they will need to eventually learn how to navigate for themselves and learn how to self-advocate. It is important to know kind of like what academic expectations are. I think that for us, being transparent with students is one of the most important things we can do about explaining like what this test is, why it's in place, why we disagree with it, but why we're going to be available for prepping and for also debriefing this process where you might have been interrogated in the placement testing center, which is maybe one of the places where you least expected to be interrogated about your identity and why you're here in the first place, or why you don't have the appropriate form of ID. I think we as education advocates are also helping in the form of advocating at the higher ed institutions themselves and saying, it's actually not okay that you're asking what languages are spoken at home or by parents or what country we were born in to determine what test that you're giving the student. Those types of small forms and of advocacy are what we're kind of doing on a regular basis, as well as advocating for folks or uplifting some systems who are taking it upon themselves to do multiple measures for placement. And some testing centers, for example, that we're working with are very aware of how these practices are perpetuating institutionalized racism and are thinking about how they can have conversations with students about not just what courses they took in high school, but what are they practicing on a regular basis? How are they using social media? How are they writing on a regular basis? And how does that actually translate into an English course? I think if we think about placement into courses in more creative ways beyond just a standardized test, that's when we're really going to get a feel for how a student might be ready to thrive and kind of what support systems are also needed once they get there.
Keisha, you want to?
Yeah, so my reaction to that is that there are many people in this room who are implementing the kinds of strategies that combat the developmental education policies. And so whether we're talking about bridge programs, integrated education and training, if we're talking about guided pathways and all of these levers that sometimes aren't in the post-secondary space, they might be in the workforce space. But if we think about in the partnership with CBOs, those are the kinds of things that mitigate the developmental ed policies. And I know there's a movement afoot around the country to get rid of those things. But really think about how do you leverage where young people are and what are the policies that support them. So if we think about adult education, the workforce development, and then the post-secondary institution, as Adrienne was talking about, as the partner to provide that credit and to really seamlessly, like the Chicago Cred program, that's how you mitigate the institutions and the policies that don't want to come along in terms of getting rid of developmental ed.
Thank you. So I wanted to, so this is a question for all of you before we switch to our student respondents. I wanted to ask you, just based on the work that you've done and the experience you have, where you're sitting from. I mean, we have a lot of people in this room who are trying to engage post-secondary institutions, right, in their communities, and it's not easy, right? For some reason, a lot of them aren't getting enough attention from post-secondary institutions. So I wanted to ask you, just what kind of advice do you have for folks here who are trying to engage post-secondary institutions in their communities, and what would they recommend? What would you recommend that they do? Starting with you, Adrienne.
The first thing that I would say is that not all higher ed institutions are partners. And so there's a readiness to mention that like the infrastructure of many of these institutions aren't designed to partner well. That's why at the very beginning I said, let's remove the vernacular of sort of rethinking or reimagining, because higher ed can do a lot of that. We can talk you to death. We can outthink you. But who's really talking about reinventing themselves and the infrastructure to actually support very deliberate partnerships? So one is not all institutions are partners. The second thing that I would suggest that you do is to literally come up with what are the qualifiers that you would have to be a partner. So one of the things that I often in my career has been in mostly higher ed over these 30 years, and when organizations would come to us and say that they wanted to partner, my question one of the first questions was, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And if there's not clarity around the problem to be solved, then there's not going to be clarity around what is the nature of the partnership and the relationship. And the third thing that I would say is be relentless on who you are focusing on in that partnership. So as I shared before, a lot of our work is on the learner. It's learner focused. And we can then disaggregate all kinds of learners as we begin to think about that. But be very, very intentional and very specific about who is it that you're trying to serve, and again, what problem you're trying to solve in doing so.
And so I know that your work now is campus-based, right? And so your organization has partnerships with post-secondary institutions. So what would you recommend other organizations who want to do campus-based work that they do in terms of being able to better partner with post-secondary institutions?
I would say meet the students or meet the learners where they're at and recognize that sometimes you got to come down to their level to be able to move them to wherever it is that they want to go in life. And by building those relationships, I'm always going back to those relationships. Sure. I'm always going back to those mentors. Sure. Because had it not been for those mentors in my life, I would not have even graduated this past December with not 1, but 2 degrees from Chico State. And so I keep going back to the importance of having those relationships, having those mentors that guide you towards success, whatever that success looks like to you. Having those learners really recognize that you care truly, deeply about the work that they're trying to accomplish in their lives can transform an opportunity youth, can transform the way that they see the world, can also allow for them to see that bright light at the end of the tunnel. Because it's done that for me, and I've seen it over and over with all of the learners that we have in our Pipeline Through College program. So being able to institutionalize our program, it's now institutionalized at Chico State, whoop, whoop. I'm still celebrating that. But now we're taking that Pipeline Through College methodology of mentorship to high schools all throughout Sacramento, and hopefully wanting to expand that throughout the nation. But I would leave you all with that. Build those relationships and connect heart to heart, because like Danica said, it's like you're teaching the next generation. Because although the youth are 40% of the generation today, or the population today, we're 100% of the future. So put as much knowledge, as much wisdom in that population so that they can be able to take over this world once our elders are gone and pass on. So it's not about the hard work, it's about the hard work. Y'all got it.
Yeah, it sounds like from what you're saying, it's very clear that kind of a value proposition from the part of the CBO, the community-based organization, is the ability to provide this highly personalized level of support to community college students, right? I'm sure that the counselors at the community college cannot provide that level of personalized support, right? Because they're serving hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of students on campus. So I think it's important for CBOs to be always kind of highlighting that value proposition when they talk to their partner community colleges. Danica, to you, what the advice you have for others who are trying to do this work with community colleges?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight on this theme of the power of really strong relationships. I think when thinking about effective ways to partner with post-secondary institutions, it's important for a CBO, for example, to think about what you think a healthy relationship is going to look like for you and for the students that you serve, and what are the markers of that positive relationship for you, and what are the things that you're willing to sacrifice, and what are the things that you're not? Because partnering with higher ed institutions, for example, is part of how we are thinking long-term about scaling and sustaining our work. But we've had to be very strategic with who we partner with and why, and sometimes end certain partnerships because of the way that they are not serving our students, but also not serving our staff in a way that's helpful for them, in a way that's potentially toxic. And I think being very, having lots of ownership of your model, your resources, whatever you're investing in is really important. And I talked about how our model is very simple at its core in terms of one-on-one support for students, but it requires time, energy, compassion, care, and it also requires a budget line item for the staff members of a CBO, for example, to make sure that they're getting what they need in providing that one-on support for students. And because like you were saying about attending the OIF conference, I love coming here as well. And I always have things that I'm taking away from me, and I always feel like there's a little bit of kind of restoration and re-energizing and healing that happens in a large part because of some of the amazing keynotes that we have the privilege of listening to. Mm-hmm. But I always think about, like, man, I wish I had my entire team here so I could share this experience with them. Yes. And I think thinking about how we can just fully show up as folks who are supporting, the leadership of the organization, how we can make sure that every level of the organization has the support that it needs to heal, to provide, care for their own trauma, to figure out how they can show up for students also in the best way. Really relates through all the way to partnership work, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons that we're very thinking strategically about sustaining our work that's going to hold on to model integrity, and it really relates to taking care of healthy staff members.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I want to ask you, Keisha, and let me just set this up a little bit. So I want to touch on the problem of scale, which you talked about, right? So Karen Pittman, who is one of the leaders of this work, talks about us beating the odds constantly. So we're beating the odds, right? Which is great, but we need to change the odds. And so what we're doing here is great, but there's this constant question of how do we do more of it? There are 4 million plus opportunity youth, right? So how do we do more? What's the role of policy? And I invite others to weigh in as well, but let me start with you.
Okay, great. So a couple of things I just wanted to leave folks with and then do a plug for my colleague Thaddeus Ferber out there. The first thing is to really remember that equity is a process, not an outcome. So we can't just check it off on the box and say we have it done. It's everything that we mentioned. To do all of these things, it takes resources, it takes budget investments. And so throughout this whole convening, we had narrative change, there's organizing, and public policy and advocacy is definitely one of the tools that we have to focus on. So we have to focus on what is happening with our budgets at the federal and the state level, most importantly, because that's what helps support many of the things that Danica and Anna was talking about. And then the last thing I would say is you have a wonderful opportunity because the Forum for Youth Investment, along with the Aspen Forum and CLASP and many other partners, are working to co-develop a policy agenda with you all at the federal level, what needs to happen at the state level and what needs to happen at the local level, and also leading and learning from what the National Council of Young Leaders are doing and reframing their policy agenda. So we've been doing this work, but we've been doing on a shoestring budget, and so we need everybody's voice to really attack at all those levels and what are those levers that we need to scale and understand that what needs to work.
Great. Okay. So we do this work for young people, and we wanted to bring in the voices of young people. So I want to make sure that both Terry and Alana are here. Okay, they're here. All right. So I wanted to give you the chance to respond to what you've heard and also ask questions of the panel if you have them.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope everyone is well so far. My name is Alina Durant. I am out of Hartford, Connecticut. I am a facilitator and a youth advocate, a part of the Young Legends, and we are an organized group out of the Hartford Opportunity Youth Collaborative. So a little bit about me. At the age of 6, I was placed in foster care, and I was in there for 7 years. I am a first-generation graduate. I graduated in 2013. While I was in high school, I was a part of many different programs that were directed towards me being in the health field, which is something I was always interested in, helping other people with trauma. I have a 4-year-old son. I dealt with a lot of abuse, physical and emotional abuse, growing up all throughout my life. So it brought a lot of mental health trauma, and that brought me to wanting to be a life and health coach and wanting to really change the mindset of, young people like me or people that have been in situations that I've been in. So as far as going towards my academic skills and really having the certification, I was a part of many different health career opportunity programs where I received training and certificates that then led me to wanting to go to post-secondary education and really getting the credentials that I needed to begin towards my success and my career pathway. What I feel like college should have done that I feel would benefit my situation is better academic support. It's always a lack in academic support and genuine academic support, as far as really understanding who you're working with, understanding our learning styles. I've been currently dealing with a lot of online course issues because just time management, I have, like I said, I have a child, I work. So being able to manage my time, if I have the right advisor, I would be able to, they could direct me to what type of courses I could take, what credits I've earned over time with the trainings I received, the transferred credits that I received in college and in high school, and being able to push me in the right direction towards success, not for what they want and getting me out of school, getting a degree, but really being successful and learning what I need to know, not for what they want to know and for their numbers and their rates and for how people look at them and getting more youth in because I'm going there, but really helping me learn and achieve the goals I want.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Terry, come on up.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Terry Green. I am from Columbus, Ohio. I am the founder and executive director of a startup nonprofit called Think, Make, Live Youth. I'm also a proud member of Opportunity Youth United, OYU. Shout out to my team out there. I'm a graduate from Youth Build. I graduated from Youth Build in 2013. And I'm also a former justice-involved young adult. So I served 4 years in prison from 2009 to 2013. When I walked inside a prison, I was what they consider as a statistic, a young black male who had a mother that was dealing with drug issues, a father that was disconnected from the household, walked inside a prison as what they considered as a menace to society, all those negative labels from the situations that I was experienced as a homeless youth when my mother got incarcerated. But I walked inside a prison and I was determined that I was going to do something different with my life. And within 90 days of my incarceration, I received my GED. And within 180 days of my incarceration, I was working on my small business management degree through Hockin College.
Come on, Terry.
And so for me, I walked inside a prison saying that I was going to come out and I was going to do something different. I took a course offered by the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program, offered by Ohio State University. And when I got out, I was really excited because my first experience in college was inside a prison. And I said, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to go out and I'm going to get back in school. And so I got inside the local Columbus State Community College. But I was dealing with the challenges as an ex-offender. So I was homeless again, this time living with my aunt on a low-income apartment, and I had an opportunity to go share my story for a senior humanities class at Ohio State University. And I developed Think, Make, Live as a PowerPoint presentation. And now, this PowerPoint presentation, I received my 501c3 status with the organization last year. And I have local and also national partnerships that's helping me to be able to move the mission to provide innovative leadership and civic engagement programs to support opportunity youth in Central Ohio. And so, for me, I just have 2 points that I feel like we should address in terms of making it more successful around young people with post-secondary. And the one is that we should have more accessibility for young people who are being affected by the criminal justice system inside of our higher education. I believe that we should remove the box on all college applications nationwide. We should have a campaign to do that. And for me, I feel like, for example, I have college clients, universities that pay my organization to do consulting and do public speaking, but they won't allow me to apply and be a student because of my background. I mean, Ivy League universities from Emerald University to Ohio State University would pay me as a consultant, but will turn my application down because I'm an ex-offender. And then my second point, and I know my time is getting short, is I think that all colleges should recognize skills as a value and not so much as money being just the value to earn credits. I believe that me, for example, as a business owner, I manage people, I do payroll, I create business plans, I write grants, I do public speaking, I travel. I'm doing all the things from executive director. This year alone, I wrote 2 grants myself, one for $130,000 and one for $120,000. But college universities don't see those skills as earned credit. And I believe that if we can be able to switch the narrative around what is the value for a college credit And what is the value for someone of a degree, a person like me who's been a homeless youth at the age of 15, turned my life around and running an organization that has a 501c3 status, is changing lives. I believe that it should be a value for me, for a university to have my name connected to them as a success.
Okay, Terry.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Yes. Credit for prior learning. I think we need to do that. So let's open this up.
Yeah.
Let's see if folks have questions. And I see one here and two. Okay, so let's take them all at the same time and then come back to the and three actually. So here. So there are three questions. The mic's coming, right?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you for all of the participants. I had a quick statement and then question. I really want to, as we talk about policy and systems change, one of the things we haven't really talked about is faculty and teaching. And when we look at statistically, NCES talks about that 75% of K through 12, as well as higher education faculty, are white, and that in and of itself is not problematic. It is, but also we need to talk about pedagogy, curriculum, and cultural excellence when it comes to students, because we can do all of this learner preparation, but if we still send equipped, confident, self-efficacy students into a classroom where teacher expectations are low and they are not affirmed, then the learning cannot happen. And then when we talk about also policies and systems, education is for workforce. Black women are the most educated group and the least paid. And so when we look at these systems, I don't think that we can talk about them in isolation. And so I'm wondering for the institutions and for the students, what is the role of faculty, their learning, their pedagogy, but also workforce connections to ensure equity?
Thank you. All right, and there was one here, one there.
Good morning, Carrie Lamont with Unite LA and the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative. So in California, we are doing a lot of work right now with our community college system to try to align our degree pathways to industry demand, and doing backwards mapping, looking at the labor market, figuring out what are the credentials that will meet that demand, and then giving students information about how much money they will earn if they go into these certain career pathways. So my question for Southern New Hampshire University is, in this online, national online education platform, how do you mitigate against the risk that students might opt in to credentials or degrees that are not in real alignment with the jobs that are available in their local region?
Great, and then one more.
So thanks, you guys. This has been really powerful. Steve Patrick, Aspen Institute. So I just wanted to bring the rural and tribal communities into the conversation. I think we've talked a lot. I'm glad we talked about HBCUs. Shout out to the tribal colleges that are out there. And it does seem, and this is a question probably for Adrian, but welcome any of y'all responding to it, which is, it seems like if you wrap young people in supports through community-based organizations, through like the Jemez charter schools that Shendo over there started. Raise your hand, Shendo. Kevin, Shendo. Or if you are supporting them through the work that folks at Taos Pueblo do through a prevention lens. And if you're out at Hopi where you're 2 hours from a higher education institution, then the digital opportunity alongside support, and it's taken me a long time to be like, I don't know about online for our kids, you got me. I'm just curious, like, can we come away from this with a plan for how to scale that kind of opportunity with in particular the Native communities, but also really remote rural communities that don't have access to higher ed?
Yeah. Great, thank you. Adrian, please go ahead.
Now I have to remember all the questions.
No, well,
So the first,
there's one back.
and I'll do this very quickly. So to the first point, the question was about pedagogy. So in our competency-based education format, we don't use faculty. We use reviewers because it's based on competency. And so it is based on what the student can demonstrate or the learner can demonstrate that she, he, or they have done. And so everything that he just talked about would have qualified if he had shown proficiency and it was reviewed. So we have reviewers, and then in terms of the cultural competence, We have a teaching faculty center that focuses deeply on cultural competence. And so some of the learnings, and I'm going to cross over a little bit of what you just asked. So the work that we're doing in the refugee camps, boy, if we can do it at refugee camps, then why can we not do that on our reservations in other places, in rural and others? And so we're beginning to test some of that as well. And so when we often think about digital or technology, we think about where, access to laptops and computers and things like that. No, we're talking about infrastructure for technology. And so the one thing that many people do have they have mobile devices. And so how do you build platforms that are accessible to with mobile devices? And in fact, if you look at some of the other, in other countries where you might think that technology infrastructure is absolutely shot, the one thing that most people have are mobile devices. And so how do you use that as a tool? And so we're doing a lot of testing with that as well. And then the question about the work that's happening in California, actually they actually came to visit us several months ago to understand what does that platform look like and how do you do that mapping and the skills mapping with industry. The thing that you have to be cognizant of when you're talking about industry is that industry often asks for certain things, but they don't know what it actually looks like. And so what is the intermediary? What is the intermediary process that takes the life of a college or a university and employers and brings it to the table to then say, if this is what you're looking for, how do you develop the competencies and the skills within a learning portfolio or a pedagogy that actually the employers would recognize? And so, again, don't be afraid by all of this. SNHU is a big system, and we've actually developed the investment and actually have systems in place for us to be able to do that. And so, so that's the caveat. You've got to be able to understand and speak the same kind of language so that when industry is talking about these kind of tech skills, that you're actually building towards that, but you have the learner at the very center of that, and that the employer, with what you come up with, that the employer will verify that. It makes absolutely no sense to create these things if the employer says, well, maybe we'll take it, maybe we won't. Oh, please take it. This should not be a begging situation. They need to verify that, yes, that's the credential, the badge, the degree that we want, and that's the pathway that we will recognize.
All right, thank you, Adrian. And please join me in thanking these wonderful panelists. Thank you for your time. Come on up, Monique. All right.
Okay.
I wanted to transition us. We are going now into our breakout sessions, and we will reconvene here today at 1 p.m. Please join me in thanking our panelists and our excellent moderator and our youth speakers as well.